You are listening to the Auto Riff Podcast. Every week, we take a look into the car world. We take a look at our past, our present, and our future in automobiles. And sometimes we just chat cars. Sit back and relax as we slide into your speakers or headphones and talk about what's getting our motors revving this week. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Auto Riff. So this is the first episode I'm going to do with YouTube in mind as well. So I'm recording it visually right now as I record, and then also for the audio for the podcast. So I just want to say that I recently started watching a show on Amazon Prime called C10 Clash. I just wanted to quickly mention this because what it lacks in straight out fake entertainment value, like a lot of shows, it makes up for it actually going through the process of rebuilding or restoring, in this case, C10 Chevrolet trucks. I just wanted to give it a quick plug for one, because I love those body styles of trucks, but also because of the nature for which they go through the build and kind of show the process. I really enjoy that as it gives you kind of a peek into the actual work that goes into it, and it's very informational. So when I started to consider what I wanted to do with this episode, I thought I've been doing a lot of electric vehicles and Japanese hybrids, obviously with the Prius last time, and I wanted to do a cool V8 muscle car to shake it up and get to something I really liked. Because when I started actually thinking about doing this show, that was kind of my thing, was I was like, oh, I really love muscle cars, and I really want to do a lot of muscle cars, then I'll kind of learn other cars as I go. And I haven't really done any, I don't think, to be honest with you. So my inclination was actually to do the Chevy Nova this week. I thought it was an interesting transition between the Prius and doing maybe another muscle car, because it's the Nova started life as an economy car that turned into a V8 muscle car. So I thought, okay, we're going from a Prius economy car. Maybe I'll do, maybe next time, like, I don't know, GTO, Chevelle, something. But this was kind of a nice bridge between the two. And as I started to do preliminary research on that car, I came across the 80s Nova. And I came across something called NUMMI. And what was that, I wondered? So I clicked on it and came across what I thought was kind of a fascinating story to tell. So NUMMI stands for New United Motor Manufacturing Incorporated, and lasted from 1984 until 2010. And it was effectively a merger of sorts between General Motors and Toyota. The plant was in Fremont, California, was previously a GM plant from 1962 until 1982. And was considered one of the worst in terms of quality. In fact, there were stories of employees drinking alcohol on the job and were frequently absent, even enough so that the production line couldn't be started, and even committed petty acts of sabotage, such as putting Coke bottles inside of the door panels so they'd rattle and annoy the customer. That's a quote. So here's a list of the vehicles that were assembled at this plant in that time period, in case you have one of them and have an annoying rattle and that you can't figure out. So there was the 1962 to 1981, the GM C and K series pickup trucks, this 1964 to 1977 Chevrolet Chevelle, the 1964 to 1977 Pontiac Le Mans, the Chevrolet El Camino, the Pontiac GTO, the Oldsmobile Cutlass 442, the Buick Grand Sport, GMC Sprint, Buick Century, Buick Regal, GMC Caballero, Chevrolet Celebrity, and the Oldsmobile Cutlass Sierra. As you can see, there is quite a long list, and a few of those are like classics today. Like there's muscle cars in there. You got the Chevelle, you got the GTO in there, you got the 442. Can you even imagine doing some of these things with a car? The fact that the plant lasted as long as it did is crazy, and really what it must have done to the reputation of GM, which, let's be honest, in the 80s was kind of dwindling at that point anyways. What's more surprising is when they reopened this plant as NUMMI, they hired back 85% of the workforce. I mean, now maybe the 15% they didn't rehire were the problematic ones, but still, that's pretty surprising. So NUMMI was, in fact, a way for Toyota to begin manufacturing cars in the US, and for GM to get an inside look at how to build high-quality, profitable small cars. Some of the workers that were rehired were sent to Japan to learn the Toyota production system. Now, if you're asking yourself, why would Toyota need to build cars in the US when they were clearly successful at making them in Japan? The answer is that there were rumors of the US Congress putting import restrictions on them. So in theory, NUMMI was a win-win for both sides. The first car to roll off the assembly line in December of 1984 was a yellow Chevrolet Nova. See, I came full circle. Except this Nova wasn't a small hot rod, it was a Toyota Corolla. A front-wheel drive economy car with a 1.6-liter four-cylinder engine. That Nova would only last until 1988, but not because the car was discontinued, but because it was renamed and rebadged as a Geo Prism, which we will get to later. Some good things about the plant, though, was that it got a complete makeover in the way it operated. And quote, among the cultural changes were the same uniform, parking, and cafeterias for all levels of employment in order to promote the team concept and a no layoff policy. Built-in processes for quality and employee suggestion programs were continual improvement were other changes. Consensus decision-making reached management level in contrast with the old departmentalization. So halfway through writing this, I listened to a little podcast called This American Life. Pretty popular. I'm pretty sure most people have heard of it. Then it featured NUMMI. And I came away with a different perspective. Firstly, how awesome it was that Toyota was able to basically turn this terrible plant and broken system completely around, and how GM never implemented it into the rest of their factories. I mean, Toyota proverbially gave GM all the answers on a test, and they still failed it. Apparently, it wasn't for a complete lack of trying, but no other factory was willing to adopt the system, and even later on, when they were forced to, they still rejected it. And it really came down to two different philosophies. Toyota strived for quality over quantity, and they encouraged its workers to come forward with better ways of doing things, and even gave them a bonus if it was something that was implemented. And we're talking things that maybe cut 2 seconds, like, maybe a little tray or whatever that held bolts. If it cut any amount of time, it allowed you to get more items through and easier and faster so that it was built properly. Whereas GM in that time wanted to push out as many cars as possible despite defects. There were stories of cars with completely wrong parts on them being put all the way through the line, then pushed to the side so that they could later come by and switch the parts out, just in an effort to never stop the line. I know I heard one story of a car, I don't remember it was, but it had, it was, how GM at the time, they had essentially, they had similar cars that, so like a Buick and a Chevy could basically be the same car minus a different front end. Well, they would be pushing through maybe a Chevrolet and then put a Buick front end on it, and they just kept pushing it through and pushing it through and pushing it through. And then at the end of the line, they'd have to push it off to the side because it had the wrong front end. And then somebody would have to come by, take that front end off, put the new one on, and maybe that guy didn't know how to do it very well and would make other problems with it. So a huge quality control problem there. So NUMMI changed all of that, and even in a similar venture in Canada called CAMI Automotive, which was a joint venture between GM and Suzuki, these two partnerships gave rise to the brand called Geo. Geo was a subdivision of Chevrolet that lasted from 1989 until 1997, and Geo models were manufactured by GM in joint ventures with 3 Japanese automakers. The Prism was produced at the NUMMI assembly plant. The Metro and Tracker were produced at the CAMI assembly plant. The exceptions were the Spectrum and the Storm, which were entirely manufactured by Isuzu in Japan. Geo Metro convertibles and early Geo Trackers were built in Suzuki in Japan as well. The reason I wanted to mention this was I remember Geo having just a bad reputation, and I have to wonder if it was even deserved. Seeing as how the plants that built them were known for their quality, these cars were actually probably the best thing that GM was putting out at that time. Then more confusing to me was when they shut down Geo and rebranded some of the vehicles as Chevrolets again. At one point, Chevrolet was producing the Prism or Corolla and the Cavalier. So literally as I'm writing this, I looked up the comparison between the two cars. The first website I went to compare them, and I won't mention which one, had a picture, and I'm going to show you if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're not, bear with me. Either go watch this on the YouTube or trust me what I'm saying. So the one picture of a Cavalier is all modded out with nice wheels, a hood scoop, and stuff like that. And the prism on the website looks like it was literally just in a fender bender. So I don't know if there's a better way of describing the reputations around both cars. But if you actually look at the specs of the cars, the prices were nearly identical. The Prism was like a couple $100 more. The Prism had 10 more horsepower. It had a smaller motor, a 1.8 liter versus a 2.2 liter, and had significantly better fuel mileage. What's even weirder is Toyota sold the Cavalier in Japan. It's literally, I don't have a picture of it for the YouTube, but go look it up. Toyota Cavalier. It is just a Cavalier with a Toyota badge right on the hood. And it did not sell well, because Japanese people could look at the Cavalier and go, this is not built well. It's all kind of confusing. What I can understand is, what I can't understand is, why would GM sell two cars in the same dealership that compete directly with each other? And then the fact that the Cavalier outsold the Prism by such a wide margin. Let's take, 1997, which was the peak of both cars actually in sales. The Prism, probably the better car, sold 62,992 cars. The Cavalier sold, wait for it, 302,161 cars. That means basically for every 5 Cavaliers that were sold, 1 Prism was sold. Now, obviously, the Cavalier was sold in more configurations. Kind of. It had a 2-door and a 4-door variant. But still, what would have driven that? I looked and I couldn't really find an answer, and I can't say much. I owned a Pontiac Sunfire, which was obviously the better looking Cavalier, and if you're wondering, also outsold the Prism. And I can't figure it out. My guess is, and if I don't really recall Prisms being at dealerships much in that time period. I mean, I was, let's say even 1997, I was 10. But it was made through 2002, which was almost when I started driving. I think I would have noticed. I was very aware of cars at that age, and I don't remember. I've been very aware of cars since I was 1, but I don't really remember driving past Chevrolet dealerships and seeing Prisms anywhere. Now, you saw Cavaliers, and then later the Cobalt, but you never really saw Prisms. Yeah, every now and then, like, I knew a kid who had a GM Prism, and I remember thinking, oh, that's a piece of crap. When in reality, it probably wasn't. It was probably the better of the cars. The only thing I could figure is there was a bias probably within GM, and they just didn't produce as many of them. So I know this episode was supposed to be about NUMMI, and I got a bit off track here. But if you look at the vehicles made in the NUMMI plant, most of them were just Toyotas, and GM seemed to take very little advantage of the partnership. Here's a list of the cars that were produced there until the closure in 2010. So the Chevrolet Nova was made from 84 to 88. The Corolla was made from 87 until 2010 when the plant closed. The Prism, which was a Corolla, and also the Nova, was made from 89 when the Nova stopped being made until 2002 as the Chevrolet Prism. They made the Toyota Hilux, which was the predecessor of the Tacoma. They made the Toyota Tacoma from 1995 until 2010, the Toyota Volts from 2002 to 2004, and the Pontiac Vibe from 2002 to 2009. For some reason on that list, the Toyota Matrix isn't on there, and I don't know if the Matrix was made in Japan and then the Vibe was made in the States. But I remember, of those cars, really the Vibe is the only one that stands out to me as something GM kind of took advantage of. I mean, they had the Prism until the Vibe started being made, but the Vibe was, like I said, it was the Matrix, but it was kind of the Matrix that they put their own spin on, so it made sense, I guess, and it kind of sold it. You didn't really look at a Vibe and think, oh, Matrix. You knew it was a Matrix, but it kind of looked more like, because it came out the same time as the Matrix, maybe, that it was a joint venture of it was kind of like, the Matrix was kind of a cool looking little car. Like, I have driven one. They're kind of cool looking little cars. But the Vibe was kind of like the better looking version, at least. So, NUMMI, like I said, it was closed in 2010 as GM filed for bankruptcy and dissolved the partnership. The land and factory were sold off to Tesla a few months later and is now known as the Tesla factory. with a part of the deal being that there was a collaboration between Tesla and Toyota on electric vehicle equipment. And that is the story of NUMMI, the factory that should have been GM's saving grace and was never utilized the way it should have been until it was too late. If you were wondering about Cami, the factory is still up and running solely as a GM plant now that produces the Equinox for Chevrolet. So if you know anyone or yourself that have owned any of the vehicles that NUMMI produced, or if you know anybody who knows anything about the factory, I'd love to hear more about it. Thanks again for listening to the Auto Riff. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, or you can email us at theautoriff@gmail.com. Without you, the listener, I'd just be a crazy person talking about cars to myself. I appreciate the support and the conversations with my listeners that this provides. Until next time, everyone drive safe and have a great week.